well. When I was, again, preparing her intro, looked for things that we had in common, and we do have a lot of things in common. We are both part-time educators. We both collect vinyls. We should be sharing some repeats or something. And I also asked Marianne if she had any fun facts to share, and she had the best fun facts. I don't think anyone can top that, so sorry, Crystals. Your cat was cool, but Marianne actually accidentally auditioned for a Beyonce music video. She didn't get it, so thankfully she's here now today to talk about design systems. Marianne, she is the head of design systems at ITVX. She's formerly led design as well in CNN, and she's going to be talking to us about design systems, the lean approach. Very interesting. Yeah, everyone give it up for Marianne.
Hello? Hello, can you hear me? Right, hi everyone. So yeah, I did audition accidentally for a Beyonce music video, but hopefully I'm in the right place tonight. But another confession, this is actually my first time presenting at a meetup, so please be gentle with me. Safe word, jelly bean, okay? So thanks everyone for joining in person and online. I'm really excited to share my thinking and thoughts and framework. It's called LeanDS. So I have coined/stolen that name from Jeff Gorthef. So sorry, whoops. But hopefully it'll make sense as I go through. And it's essentially a framework from my experience working on design systems in an enterprise environment and my kind of thoughts on how you can tackle systems in those complex environments. So hopefully you'll be able to take away some interesting bits and pieces. Well, I hope you find it interesting. So first up, I thought I'd just introduce myself again, so sorry. Just for those that don't know me, so yeah, I am currently head of design systems at ITVX. Previously, I was design lead at CNN, where I spent nearly sort of 7 years there working on the design system there. I've been sort of dabbling in design in the design sphere for the last 15 years, so I've been really lucky to work with some really incredible people and brands. But I'd say that one of the career highlights was naming the CNN design system Bossy. And yeah, that was named after the Stormzy track Bossy Bop. It took a while till people clocked on to that one. So yeah, great achievement there. So before I jump in, I'll just do a quick summary of what you can expect from this talk, and you can decide then if you want to leave. So yeah, but please stay. So first up, what I want to share are my methods and approach for research within a design system team. Then how you can then ensure that your design system moves with the organization rather than against it. And then finally, looking at how you can then synchronize all those things and balance it in a realistic sense with the resources and kind of scope that you have within your capacity. I thought I'd start first by talking about the perceptions of a design system within an organization, because we all know here that perception is very different to reality. And to external teams and people, design systems can often be perceived and assumed to just, we've got everything in place and it's ready to go and it always fits perfectly. And, we all know that it's an evolving thing. It's never perfect. And I also find that, from my own experience anyway, I'm curious if others feel the same, we're always expected to move really, really fast all the time. Like teams will kind of come to us and they want you to react often quite quickly. And it's quite easy to fall into that sort of support and response team mentality, which is a tricky one. the bottom GIF's not working, sadly. But controversially, I think sometimes from an outsider, the design team can sometimes be seen as just like the fun team. Everyone's like, oh, they just sort of do their thing. They have lots of fun. And I think all these things are true to a design system team in certain amounts, and we do have lots of fun, and we can work really quickly, and sometimes things do fit perfectly. But sometimes the reality is a little bit more like this. I know personally, I've often felt like little Oliver over there, kind of asking for more, more adoption, more support, more resources. And then in turn, you then often end up feeling like the fella at the bottom. It's fair to say that design systems are one hell of a ride. There's all different chops and turns, and it's a journey. And it's no wonder really when you actually think about the design system life cycle. If we look at the beginning, when you're in the growth phase, you're focusing purely on adoption and the energy levels are like up here. It's just like, it should probably be more called like the party time phase. It's just fun, it's frantic, but it's exciting, it's energetic. Yeah, you might have a little bit of resistance, but it's, it's all good. You then might glide into the optimization phase. And this is where it starts to get a little bit tricky, but it's still like fun zone. It's still like when you start to really start thinking about standards and best practices and the changes that you want to make and things that you want to establish. And then you might even start doing things from scratch. So it starts feeling like really rewarding really quickly. Then things around phase 3 start to sort of dip a little bit off the party track, still like fun, but it goes a little bit more into like business strategy track. And your organization might have gone through some changes. Teams might have spun up, teams might have broken down. And the needs for the design system team may have expanded or even pivoted. And senior management might even be saying things like, but isn't the design system finished now? If you're at this point, then you know full well that it's certainly not finished. If anything, you're actually at a point where the workload of the design system team has actually doubled or tripled. There's actually so much to do. But the organization at this point needs more buy-in. So your strategy has got to change. And then finally, if you're lucky enough to get to the final stage, the final level, you might have reached the full design system maturity stage and hit the maintenance territory. And you're now just an abundance of gray hair and kind of more fine lines. And it's still fun, but it's challenging, but it's a whole other ball game in terms of negotiation, the strategy, the work. It's a lot more of a logistical challenge. And I'm kind of wondering, I'm assuming, but I feel that those that were interested in my talk tonight, I'm assuming that you might be in one of these two phases. And if so, you might actually relate to this meme, which a colleague sent to me. Because, yeah, there is quite a big difference between building a design system and maintaining one. And I'd just sort of show of hands on if anybody else sort of feels a connection to this weathered guy on the right. Thanks, I see you. So let's not get too Debbie Downer about design systems, because most of us been there, seen there and got the t-shirt. And yeah, they might drive us a little bit loopy. They might make us question everything. And they might just be endless conversations about buttons. However, they do provide, it's unquestionable, they do provide great value to teams, businesses, and products. And that's why they are so rewarding. So let's look at some data to put that into perspective. In 2019, Envision published a report. So it's a little bit old now, but I feel that this still resonates. It was a report about design maturity across the digital landscape. So you might have seen this already. They had around 2,200 respondents, and they were able to synthesize the data in a really interesting way. So what you can see here is that the output of levels had maturity ranked from level 1 to level 5, with level 5 being the ultimate goal for like design maturity. So much so that these companies were labeled as the visionaries, as they were the ones that were driving business strategy through design. And what separates this top 5% from the rest is that they were tackling design in a holistic 360 way. And therefore, they are the ones that are seeing a huge financial impact within the business through design. And what was interesting was that one of the common threads in the maturity levels was that they had a significant presence and impact of the design system. So 82% of level 5 companies had established UI best practices, and nearly 80% had also regularly updated it, whereas only 30% of respondents at level 1 said that they'd updated their design system, and less than half had established best practices. So you can see there's quite a difference. And there's naturally many other aspects that do contribute to design systems, but it is evident to see that design systems are one of the key tenets of design maturity within the business. And why should the business care about design maturity? So this is another bit of data from the same report, and I think that these numbers do speak to them for themselves. What you can see here is that level 5 companies have a 4 times more impact on revenue than level 1, 5 times more impact on cost saving, 6 times more impact on time to market, and a whopping 26 times more impact on companies' valuation. So they're not really numbers to be snubbed at. It's kind of quite impressive when you see that difference. So when you see that wider impact of design on the business and the ecosystem that it lives in, it's important that we continue to shout from the rooftops that design systems aren't just a design thing. And we all know that, and they are so much more. However, more recently, there was another report released in by Zero Height. And there were a couple of data points that specifically spiked my interest. And the first was this one. And it said that 66% of the respondents said that they set goals for their design system. And I saw this and I thought, that's awesome. But then this one left me a little bit uncertain, because when asked further about their goals and the broader alignment, the numbers were a little bit lower. So 38% aligned to their organizational goals and 36 to product goals. So combined, those figures are relatively positive, but individually, they're actually lower than I personally would have expected. And the reason I think this is because aligning your design system to your organization and product goals, it's incredibly fundamental in today's vulnerable market, because design systems, sadly, are a very vulnerable space within larger businesses. I'm a big fan of Stafford Beer, his great name. And he was one of the godfathers of cybernetics, which is the science of systems. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Stafford Beer and his work. He created many models and frameworks which were mainly for operational efficiency, predominantly in the 80s. And most of these models are still relevant today. In 1985, he wrote a book called Diagnosing the System, and that's where this quote comes from. And I really love it because I actually see quite a lot of relevance to this quote, from this quote, to design systems. So a little bit of cheeky kind of stealing again. And I think it's true, because I do believe that a design system can only really survive in a particular sort of environment, because you do need the buy-in and the support. And the existence of a design system and the design system team is often somewhat separate. You know, we always sit slightly on the outside, and that does work because we do need that level of autonomy and space. But for me, the most key part of this statement is the last part, is that it cannot survive in a vacuum. You can't isolate the design system and not kind of lean back into the business. A design system needs to connect and work with and for the users and the business. So let's talk about research. I like to break research into 3 key areas: awareness and perception, usability and discoverability, adoption and contribution. So for the focus, getting tongue twisted. For the purpose of this framework, I'm referring to internal user research, so not the users at the end of the product. And worth also noting that the scope and cadence of the research depends on your business and focus area. So these are kind of more, rough kind of my take on this. But I'll go into each of these in a moment. If we zoom out a little bit and think for a second about the overarching areas of focus of a design system, then essentially I think it boils down to two primary areas: infrastructure and then the operational. And what I mean by infrastructure is the core of the design system, the libraries, the design token, the documentation, the pieces that are the heart of everything that we base everything around. And what I mean by operational is essentially workflow, communication lines, basically anything that is created to ensure that the infrastructure thrives. You could, in some ways, also say that this is where it starts to blend and step a little bit more into the world of design ops, or when you get more into the operational side of things. But what you can see with these three areas of research is that one is tapping more into the infrastructure side, one more into the operational, and then one kind of blending and meeting both areas in the middle. So the key thing that I think when focusing on research with a design system is to think about how you are connecting from one side to the other in terms of that infrastructure to operational, because you do need that full breadth and that wide lens vision. If not, you kind of go down, or you risk going down more of a kind of rabbit hole tunneled vision. So first up is adoption and contribution. And this is, I think these terms were originally coined by Nathan Curtis, with adoption, essentially like how the teams are using it, like how often and how they're adding back into it. So essentially, if you think about your research in layers, this is the foundation. And when you're like up and running and you're at a stage of consistency, you should aim really to be monitoring this regularly, I'd say monthly. And what you're looking for is quantitative data on your adoption and contribution rates. How you slice that is dependent on how you're set up and what data you have available. But as an example list, and this is by no means exhaustive, you could do this in different ways, but just a few examples of types of things that you could measure. Figma Analytics, deployed code. If you run triage sessions, is there a way you can track something there within those sessions or office hours? You might not have all the answers that you need straight away, but the key aspect with this is to start to try and figure out where you can gather some more consistent metrics to start building from. So try to spread your bets, so to speak, as the payback then will be greater. So you're covering a lot more. So what I mean by that is don't necessarily just focus on Figma data, look into potentially 2 or 3 areas so you have a good amount of comparative data. Usability and discoverability, this is the next level up. So this is the frequency of this type of research reduces. And this is looking across infrastructure and operational aspects. You want to really get down to the ground here and actually understand how users are actually using the system day to day, and not just looking at usage, but actually how it's functioning within the business. So you could be gathering a mix of quantitative and qualitative data. And in terms of frequencies, I'd probably aim for like every 3 months if possible. It depends on your team structure and capacity and various things, but you can spread it out a little bit further. You could be running more scheduled surveys or user interviews, involving more people in kind of card sorting exercises or similar. You could also be broader than that. If you know that there is a specific pain point that you want to start kind of digging into more. As an example of something that we're doing at ITV is that we've introduced dev mode into our workflow. So we're monitoring quietly at the moment, And we'll be gearing up for more focused data in terms of how well that's working in a couple of months. But we're starting to plant seeds and establish where there could be some consistent kind of feedback loops there. So I think top tip here would be making sure you do have that mix of qualitative and quantitative feedback, because it helps to add a bit more substance to the conversations that you might have later down the line with your CPOs, CDOs, if you have one, or CTOs, all the O's. And finally, top of the tower is awareness and perception. And this is purely qualitative data, to be honest. It's done a lot less frequently because you can then check in to understand perception. You can kind of put your finger in the air and see, you know, which way is the wind blowing kind of thing. And you start to gather a sense from the design system perception across the organization. And not just with primary and secondary users, but aim higher too. So reach out to senior management and gather feedback from all levels, so you get a little bit more kind of full scope of how things are kind of doing. You know, you might discover that senior management don't think too highly of the design system because they don't understand it, you know, compared to those that are using it day to day, and they might view it actually quite negatively. Hopefully that's not the case, but sometimes it can be. And if you did discover that, at least at this point, then at least you know then where you can start to focus your energy and the buy-in. And you're not sort of, you've got more of a kind of a game plan for like who you need to talk to, and you're evangelizing efforts around it. So I think aiming to do this less frequently, sort of 6 to 9 months, but again, it changes on how you're set up and what you feel is appropriate for your business and team. But less frequently is better because you don't really want to fatigue people. And I think it's a good distance then between the other data points to give people space. So if we were to take a look at how you could coordinate the research throughout the year, it could look something like this. Now, I'm pretty aware that this would have to be a very organized structure to be like working bang on these kind of timeframes, but it was just for illustration purposes. If you could aim for something like this, then great, but it's obviously, you know, got to be real about these things. And you might need to just, flex timings and sort of change it down. And it's not about having it perfectly locked down. It's not about saying, you know, it has to be on this time. The key is about the rhythm and the routine, and it's making sure that you're gathering the feedback and analyzing it frequently, and you're having those conversations and you're readdressing and trying to see where you're at, what's working, what's not, and start to kind of plan from there. So hopefully that all made sense and seemed simple and useful to follow. However, as we know, design systems are never just that simple. We operate in spaces that can only be described as like trying to work on a moving train. I don't know if many people have kind of felt like this within the business. The business twists and turns, they move slowly and then they'll move quickly, and then the design team are just expected to flex with it. It's part and parcel and part of the nature of a design system team, but there are things that we can do to help mitigate that pressure. So what if we had a design system framework? Q. Sole segue. Jeff Gothef designed and created the LeanUX canvas around 2016, and it's often used as part of the product design process. You've probably used this already within the teams and the business, or you might even already use it yourself. It's made up of 8 pieces, and its function is to build a shared understanding of the product, users, and the expected outcomes. It's an incredibly robust canvas, and its aim is to help building hypotheses much easier. And the reason is that at the core of the LeanUX canvas is the goal that teams want to focus on outcomes and less on deliverables, which is perfect for design systems because we support this mission. We focus on reducing the time for teams to not be thinking about the deliverables. I think I'm going to, but you get the gist. However, personally, I've found that when trying to apply the Lean UX canvas to a design system team, I started to hit a few hurdles, and there was a few gaps missing and how it connects then to the wider organization. So what I'd like to share with you now is my take on the Lean UX canvas, but adapted slightly for design systems. And because for some reason I like to do things in threes, I decided to split the 11 sections over 3 key areas. Also inspired by Simon Sinek's Golden Circle. It starts with the why, so understanding the purpose, the what, understanding the drivers and motives, and then it concludes with the why, which is essentially a reality check of feasibility. And this is what it looks like. So you can see that the middle purple part is pretty aligned to the Lean UX canvas, but I've sandwiched 2 additional sections on either side to provide and connect wider context. So I'll just walk you through it now. The first section is split into 3 parts: the wider organization, business goals and objectives, and system problem. And I'll walk you through now, like high level. So, kind of take it with a pinch of salt, but just so you can see how you might fill out these types of canvases. Obviously, when you do it yourself, you probably would add a lot more detail and the information would be probably kind of structured slightly differently. So first up, the wider organization. Let's say we are a media broadcast company serving video content across 6 platforms. If you work at an enterprise level, then this section could start getting quite complicated. But this is really beneficial because it's helpful for you to see where you fit in the big kind of pond. Next is business goals and objectives. So this could get quite detailed, but just for this presentation, I just kept it quite high level. But let's say, as an example, the business want to improve workflow efficiencies. That's something that they're kind of keen on at the moment. And then product kind of business objectives might be increasing views or increasing subscriptions. Obviously, it changes depending on where you are working. And then system problems. Now, this could be a really long list, but remember that it's not a wish list. It's a list of actual problems. And this is where the data that you have would feed into this area. Because there might be efficacy problems in that users are not actually using the system very well. There could be workflow dependencies, and teams see the design system as slowing them down. And there might be confusion around single source of truth, because that's often kind of spoken about as well. The middle section is made up of 5 pieces: system users, user benefits and outcomes, metric and measurement, solutions, and hypotheses, which is very similar to the Lean UX canvas. So as an example, again, system users, you might have primary and secondary users that work across so many squads. The benefits, what do you expect the users to get from the design systems? They can use it at ease, they can build and design faster, the usual things, test and ideate quicker, have much more coherent UX and UI. But again, this might be different for your business. Metrics and measurements. This will also come from the research and the information that you've gathered and things that you already know. But as an example, you might know that there's tons of detached components each month. You may have started to track delivery, ticket, duration, and lifecycle, like how long is it taking things to actually move through the end-to-end process. You might have some external feedback in terms of ratings, and you might even be using kind of tools like Chromatic from regression testing, where you're able to sort of look at how frequently components are being updated in code as well. So lean into as much as possible in this area. And then solutions. This is where you can start to ideate loosely and start proposing some potential solutions on what you're seeing already. So improving element components because you've been notified in 5 triage sessions that things were missing. You might need to refine the workflow because teams are complaining that they're moving too slowly and it's been flagged quite a few times. Or you might not have a single source of truth and you need to mitigate that confusion. And then the final piece is the hypothesis. We'll come back to this once we've finished the last section. So the final part of this framework is the feasibility aspect. And this is where you have to be honest and clear about your team structure and any dependencies. So many of you might be lucky to have a 100% centralized team of designers and developers. That can be quite rare. Sometimes, smaller, it depends on the business size. Especially in the current climate, it seems to sort of change. But for my example here, and the way that we actually operate at ITVX is that we have a distributed model. So we have 4 centralized designers on my team, and we have distributed engineering across 6 squads. So because we're distributed, we have a potential risk of dedicated engineering support. We're also impacted on time-dependent work. Certain live events might mean we need to turn things around quickly and be a little bit more on hands on deck. So again, this will change depending on your business setup. And then the plan section. This does not need to be a detailed plan. That will come later when you actually start properly breaking down the work. Here, what you want to do is call out any planning goals at a high level. For example, you might know upfront that a live event, obviously I'm speaking quite specifically about ITVX, but I'm sure you have similar things within your different businesses. But you might know that something's happening in a certain quarter. So if you are, let's say, distributed, the likelihood of you getting engineering support in that quarter is going to be slim. So you kind of have to think about those types of things. You might need to adjust and think more about what can be achieved ahead. So that's where you then might think, well, if we're not going to get any engineers in this time, or we can't do this in this time, then we just plan slightly differently. Maybe we do a bit more discovery in this time frame, and then kind of Tetris it around in that way. And then you might also have other time-sensitive things like the dev mode trial is ending, so you need to make sure that you've thoroughly tested it and that everybody is using it. And some of these things can be seen as scope and risks, so it does blend a little bit. But what I would say is that the things that potentially are a little bit more time dependent, I'd probably keep them more in this area at the bottom, which is more the plan, because that's where it will then help you later on to coordinate everything when you start blending everything together. So if we jump back to the hypothesis box, now you've got all the information to start building a hypothesis, and you can write this however you want. And this is an example how you can piece it together. So worth mentioning that this is very long, and when presenting this, you probably would not relay this whole statement to everybody. But what's useful here is that you're building that story in the same way that we're encouraged to do with the LeanUX canvas. And you're then keeping parts of it in your back pocket. So you've got that almost, say ammo, but that sounds a little bit passive aggressive. But you've got kind of the information there if you were questioned and you need to challenge anything. So let's see how this fits into the world. So again, this is quite high level, just for the sake of this presentation, you can chop and change this. So I'll just show you how it could work. I sound like Neil Buchanan. Right, here's something I made earlier. Right, we believe that tackling workflow dependencies in line with our core streaming organization and our business objective to improve delivery and efficiencies, we will help our primary users, designers and developers, to design and build faster with more coherent UX and UI. Success will be shown by shorter delivery tickets lifecycle. That could change and be a couple of things. We plan to achieve this through refining the current design system workflow. And our approach will be supported by the core design system team, whilst considering team deadlines and releases, and is part of our Q2 initiatives. So that framework is I'll just go back a little bit. So the framework is beneficial, but it's how you make it and how thorough you want to use it. And it's how you do want to structure it for what's required and what the needs are for your business. You might not need to cover all these things. And as mentioned before, you might not want to share all that information. But it's just helpful to ensure that you partner where you're going, what the strategy is, with the regular research, and just keep constantly evaluating so that you really do get the best from this type of kind of framework and thinking. It can't just be kind of one thing. They all need to kind of connect together. So to summarize the LeanDS with another list of 3 things. There's lots of 3 things. I'd say that once you have a framework and you start to define your initiatives, I really recommend creating and compiling design system PRD documents. So they're product requirement documents. So they're usually used within the product teams. But I found those to be really beneficial to help build the story of what you're working on. And you can then use that to communicate with the different audiences. I also think don't over-communicate, so you've got to constantly communicate everything. So don't assume anything ever. Don't assume that, that just even the person that you think knows the design system inside out, they've got your back. Just don't assume anything like that. Just always over-communicate, and you can never communicate too much. Yeah, they might get sick of you, but at least they'll know what you're working on. I think at least they know the direction that you're going and what the team are focused on. And don't pretend that everything is fine. Sometimes it's not fine. You know, sometimes it is a little bit stressful. You know, sometimes we don't have the velocity, we don't have the scope, and there are risks. And you don't need to be all drama about it. You know, you can be kind of clear in the communications about, you know, the potential risks, but you just need to be explicit and communicate it clearly. So my previous boss, Gwen, she would always encourage me to firstly communicate the problem, explain why it's a problem, explain the potential impact, and then offer a proposed ideal solution. And that for me is one of the most valuable pieces of advice. I mean, she gave me many valuable pieces of advice, but that was one that made my job and her job so much easier because she understood the risks and she understood what I needed from her. And she made, and I made it clear what would happen and what to expect if we didn't resolve that issue. So we've kind of all cards on the table, so to speak. So as an example, this is how I, like, to that note with kind of Gwen's teaching, is how I might visualize and communicate to senior stakeholders the potential impact, let's say. Not that I would always throw up like a ready-made deck, but, you know, just sort of visual examples. But let's say we had lack of engineering support. What I'm saying here is I'm not saying that we can't work without engineering. I'm just being pragmatic, and I'm being clear that if we were to work in the model that we're working at the moment, you know, we were working with ad hoc engineering capacity, then yeah, we'll get the stuff done, but naturally it's going to take a lot longer. So we will get there eventually. All the cards are on the table, but then at least everyone knows where we're at and what to expect. So there's no surprises from anyone. And that just helps then to communicate, and you can have then those tough conversations of potential, well, not tough conversations, that's probably the wrong turn of phrase, but you can have those conversations of understanding, yeah, impact and where you're at and kind of how things will roll out. So going back to the planning calendar that I showed you before, here's how you could start to break it up with your initiatives through quarters based on the hypotheses that you start to create with the canvas. So the canvases, you could start to do those in the grey planning phases. And then you might then have kind of start accounting for more like discovery phases. So in a similar way to how you would do it with a customer product. But the key is to account for those clear differences of when you want to do the research, when you're going to start doing the planning, you know, so you can start to have more consistent, regular conversations. You can communicate things clearly. And yeah, as mentioned before, there's no kind of nasty surprises for anybody, let's say. So to quickly conclude with yet another trio of statements, research is fundamental. In my head, I sounded like RuPaul when I said that. I don't know, I don't think I actually did though, did I? Of course I didn't. Anyway, don't forget about your research. Getting flustered and I'm nearly at the end. Don't forget about your users. Connect with them, work with them, speak with them. You know, speak the language of the business, know your audience and know how to cater the information for them. So what motivates a CPO is going to be different to what motivates the kind of design team or a product designer, and what motivates a CTO is going to be different to what will motivate somebody on the delivery side of things. So have all the information gathered and then know how to kind of cater it for your audience. And then balance risks and resources. So take calculated risks, but stay focused on the reality of what is within scope, and kind of what is within the scope and your reach within the organization. Sometimes that reality might feel a little bit frustrating if you want to get to places faster. But if you have the conversation, start planning, again, it just starts to feel a little bit easier and starts to feel less like a steep uphill battle and more of a kind of slower, more gradual incline. And with that, thanks for listening, and thanks for having me here today. Hopefully you're all still awake. You can find me here on the links here. And if you subscribe to my Substack, I'll send you a notification when I've got all the resources that I've shared today available later in the week. So I'll share the canvas and a PRD template and some various kind of other kind of fun stuff if you think it's fun like that. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. You did amazing. Nobody here believes that that was your first talk at all. We're all also always welcoming first-time speakers. But yeah, thank you so much, Marianne. I'm sure everyone here might have questions. Perhaps everyone that is in the audience here can take the time that we're networking after to come up to Marianne and ask the questions. So we'll take maybe a few questions from the folks online, if that's okay.
Cool. Can I have a safe word? Jelly bean.
We'll go easy on you. So I have a question here. From your experience, I think you spoke there about the maintenance phase, right? From your experience, what traps should be avoided when maintaining a design system to prevent unnecessary stress and frustration?
I guess maintaining things, you don't want to sort of fall into, this is going to sound a little bit kind of brutal. You don't want to fall into almost like a kind of that support kind of reactive team, almost like becoming glorified librarians. You want to be able to sort of, even if you're at that maintenance level, you should still have the space and feel that you've got the autonomy to improve things and keep it constantly evolving. I think if you reach the maintenance bit, but you're just maintaining the same ways of working, the same library elements, you know, everything's staying consistent, then you're going to kind of stagnate. It's going to kind of plateau. I think you still need to have that goal and drive and gathering the feedback loops to see where you can still make some meaningful change.
Yeah, definitely. And avoid the grey hairs.
And avoid the grey hairs, yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much. And there is a question here around any advice. So lots of people looking for advice. You shared a lot of practical information there, which was amazing as well. But this is advice on getting buy-in from executives or PMs that see design systems slowing them down, so slowing product teams down.
I think it's similar to what was mentioned before with Christoph's talk, is that I think finding with the kind of more tricky buy-ins, I think it does come back down to the way that you communicate. Find out what it is that motivates that person particularly, because it might not be, I'm going to sound quite, always assume that everyone's got the best intentions. You know, I don't think people are just out to get you or out to get the design system. It's because they probably don't understand it. They don't see how that impacts them specifically. So you need to get down at their level and understand, or get up at their level and just understand what it is that motivates them, you know, and what it is that can help solidify that buy-in a little bit more. And I think that's when it would start to feel a little bit easier. And it's not like a magic bullet. It won't happen overnight. I think being persistent with it and having a lot of thick skin and resilience, I think is kind of essential as well, because you will keep getting pushed back and you will have you might have some tricky customers for quite a long time, you know, but eventually, you know, you just need to sort of keep going with it, really.
Yeah, definitely. Continuous education. It's never done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much. I think that's all the time we had for questions. Thanks again, everyone. Give it up to Marianne. Thanks.